everybody, welcome back to my channel, and thank you for joining me for another true crime deep dive. And as you can see from the title, we are diving into another installment where we talk about the growing list of missing and deceased scientists and people in general who are tied to NASA, the Jet Propulsion Lab, Los Alamos National Lab, all of this stuff that kind of makes it look like what's going on with them might not be coincidence, might not be unconnected. So last time we laid out a pattern that is hard to ignore once you see it. A retired Air Force general with access to some of the most classified programs in U.S. history walks out of his New Mexico home and vanishes. A materials scientist who co-invented a super alloy so critical to national security that both NASA and the Air Force poured millions into it disappears without a trace on a hiking trail that she was on with two other people. And the deeper you dig into what these people were, what they knew, who they worked for, the less any of it looks like, it's just happening in a vacuum. So today we're adding more names to that list, but we're also going to pull back the lens. We're going to zoom out a little bit because there's something else happening, something that's been hiding in plain sight right above our heads. Literally, in the first quarter of 2026, the sky started doing something it has never done before, at least not on record. And when you line that up against everything we talked about last time and against the people and things we're going to talk about today, people connected to NASA, to the JPL, to planetary defense, a very different and deeply unsettling picture starts to come into focus. And I'm going to be honest with you, it feels weird talking about this stuff because obviously I'm no rocket scientist. This is not my area of expertise. I don't have multiple PhDs. A lot of this stuff is dense and complex, which is why it takes so long for me to research and put these videos out. And when you start to see the potential reasons behind things happening, it gets a little unsettling, sort of scary even. So I'm here to let you know that just like you, I'm only asking the questions and trying to learn enough to get some semblance of an answer. Basically, what I'm saying is I did the work I could. I learned as much as I could, and I'm going to translate it as best I can. I don't like what I'm seeing based on what kind of work I have done. I don't really like it, but we're going to figure this out together. We're in this together, and when things get a little existential, we will be feeling that together. So at least we're not alone. Now let's get into it because we have a lot to talk about today. But before we dive in, first let's have a word from the sponsor of today's video, Aura Frames. Today's video is sponsored by Aura Frames. So I love Aura Frames. I have one at my house, at my office. My sister has one, my brother has one, my mom has one. And for those of you who don't know what an Aura Frame is, it's a Wi-Fi connected digital picture frame that you can send photos to directly from your phone using their app. Unlimited photos, they just show up on the frame instantly wherever the frame is in the world, which sounds lovely and wholesome. I guess it depends on how you use it, but my sister and I have been using this feature for chaos, and I'm not sorry about it. We have a game, and the game is we find the most embarrassing, the most unhinged, the most what were we thinking photos from our lives, family vacations, childhood, holidays, that phase where everyone had a terrible haircut or makes the weirdest, most hideous face in a picture, all of it. And we quietly add them to my mom's frame without telling her and giving her the heads up. And then we wait to see how long it takes for her to notice. And then we wait to see who she calls first to yell at. And it's genuinely one of our favorite games. And I highly recommend it to anyone with a sibling and a mom who has a sense of humor. Mostly a sense of humor, but in all seriousness, I love the Aura Frame for my mom, especially because she's not someone who's naturally going to go digging through her phone to look at old photos. She has so many old photos in her house, but they're packed away and under things and tucked away in closets. And I've taken a lot of those photos and actually scanned them in and put them on her Aura Frame for her. And the frame just sits there on her coffee table and it does all the work for her. It cycles through everything, the good stuff, the candid stuff, the stuff she forgot existed. And she gets to just see her family all day without having to do anything. The photos look like actual prints too. The display is that good. You would genuinely not know it was a screen unless you saw the photos changing. I love the Aura Frame that's on my desk at work because sometimes I'll catch sight of a picture and just smile and have a little stroll down memory lane, and it gives me fuel to keep going. It reminds me what I'm doing everything for. Now, a couple of features that I think are actually really useful. You can preload photos before you even give it as a gift. So your mom opens the box on Mother's Day. It already has her favorite pictures on it. It's a really nice touch. If you're going to send the frame to somebody who's not close to you or somebody who's older or technologically challenged, this is perfect for them because it's plug and play. They don't have to do anything. And I love that the Aura frame automatically adjusts brightness based on the light in the room, and it turns itself off at night when the lights go out, which I appreciate because I don't need my mom's living room glowing at 2 a.m. That would creep her out, and it would probably overstimulate her. And the app hit #1 in the App Store on Christmas Day in 2025, which tells you everything you need to know about how many people are giving these as gifts. It is the best gift for anyone, and especially with Mother's Day coming up. And if you've been going through the flowers and brunch route for Mother's Day, I love that for you, but flowers are dead in 3 days, and this thing lasts forever, and it comes loaded with ammunition for your mom to use against you every time she walks past it, which honestly feels more true to the experience of having a mother than anything else. Named #1 by Wirecutter, you can save on the gifts moms love by visiting auraframes.com, and for a limited time, you can get $25 off their best-selling Carver matte frame with code stephanieharlowe. That's AURA frames.com, and use promo code stephanieharlowe for $25 off their best-selling Carver frame. Support the channel by mentioning me at checkout. Terms and conditions may apply. Thank you so much to Aura Frames for making such a great product that makes so many people happy, including myself. And thank you for sponsoring today's video. Let's dive in. Okay, so 4 days after Monica Reza vanished on a Mount Waterman ridge, 53-year-old Melissa Cassius also vanished. Melissa and her husband of 20 years, Mark, both worked at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico. Melissa worked as an administrative assistant, and Mark was a superintendent 3. So the 3 stands for the highest level. It's considered senior level. On June 26, 2025, Melissa and Mark drove into work together, arriving around 6:15 a.m., but then Melissa dropped Mark off, telling him she would finish up some work off-site before returning. Mark told Melissa, "That's fine. I'm just going to need the car back by 11, and she said she would be back by then. But Melissa was not back by 11, and initially Mark thought she had just gotten busy with work until Melissa's boss called Mark and asked if Melissa was okay because she wasn't at work. Now, according to Melissa and Mark's daughter, Sierra, she was at home in Tulsa, New Mexico when she heard her mother arrive at 7:45 a.m. Melissa told Sierra that she had forgotten her security clearance badge and she was going to work from home that day. Sierra said, quote, "She said she had forgotten her badge and my dad had forgotten his badge the day before. She just kind of laughed and I didn't question it. I didn't even know that's how they got into work." End quote. Sierra went to work, and at around 12:50 p.m., Melissa dropped off a Subway sandwich to Sierra at work for lunch. Sierra said she talked to her mother briefly and gave her a paycheck to deposit for her, and that was the last time that Sierra saw her mother, Melissa. At 1:30 p.m., Mark Cassius reached out to his daughter Sierra and asked if she had talked to her mother. Sierra said she had, and Mark asked her if she could call Melissa and see if Melissa could pick him up from work that day or if he would need to find another way home. Sierra sent a screenshot of this text from her father to her mother, Melissa. Reportedly, that message was delivered and read, but Melissa did not respond to it. At 2 p.m., Mark tried calling Sierra again, but she was working, so she was unable to answer. At 2:30 p.m., Sierra had a moment free from work, and she checked her phone to find a frantic voicemail from her father saying that Melissa had not picked him up from work. Sierra sent another text message to her mother, but this one was not even delivered. When Sierra left work at 3:30 p.m., she went directly home where she found the door locked and her mother's car parked outside. Inside, Sierra found Melissa's keys and work cell phone on the kitchen table. Melissa's wallet, personal cell phone, purse, and cash were in her office along with the paycheck Sierra had given her a few hours earlier to deposit for her. Both of Melissa Cassius's phones had been factory reset. That's important. So at 5 p.m., Mark Cassius was dropped off at home by a coworker, and he reported his wife, Melissa, missing. Okay, so first I want to give some context. Melissa lived with her husband, Mark, and their adult daughter, Sierra, in Talpa, New Mexico, which is along New Mexico Highway 518. Los Alamos National Lab, where both Melissa and her husband worked, was approximately 50 miles away from their home, about a 45-minute to an hour drive. And some people would be like, that's a large commute, that's a long commute I wouldn't want to take, but Los Alamos National Lab would probably be a drive for a lot of people who worked there because it's intentionally pretty isolated. It sits on a high plateau in northern New Mexico. It's surrounded by canyons and mountains. There's limited road access in and out, and there's no major city in close proximity. And this location was chosen specifically for secrecy, security, and also safety. And that's because Los Alamos was founded in 1943 during World War II as part of the super secret Manhattan Project. Now, as we know, because a movie came out about him recently, the Manhattan Project was led by physicist Robert J. Oppenheimer, and he brought together top scientists from around the world in total secrecy with the intention of designing and building the world's very first atomic bomb. And as we know, also 2 bombs were developed and ultimately used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, which effectively ended the war, but also opened the door to the nuclear age, which hasn't been great. Meaning that after the war, the U.S. didn't just stop needing nuclear expertise and weapons. And today, Los Alamos National Laboratory is a multidisciplinary powerhouse, so they do advanced work in plutonium research as one of the few places capable of handling plutonium at scale. They're also responsible for producing something called pits. That's the plutonium core of a nuclear weapon. So the pit is the heart of the weapon, and it's also the most sensitive and technically demanding component, the part that requires the most specialized expertise to design and produce, and obviously the most dangerous to work with. So if anyone remembers the 2007 movie Shooter, starring Mark Wahlberg, which I don't know if it's a good movie, objectively it may not be. I liked it. But Mark Wahlberg's character in this movie says, quote, "This stuff's plutonium. Nobody can handle it without dying," end quote. And he wasn't talking about actual plutonium. He was using plutonium as a metaphor for highly dangerous or explosive information. But there's a reason that quote is so accurate. Plutonium is some scary stuff. First of all, it's extremely radioactive. It's a heavy metal toxin like lead or mercury. It's pyrophoric, which means it can catch fire on its own when exposed to air without exposure to a spark or flame. And if you put enough of it together in the right way, it can suddenly start releasing a huge amount of energy. The material starts a chain reaction that feeds itself and grows very fast and, can cause some damage. It can seriously injure or kill people nearby within seconds. Now, Los Alamos National Laboratory is supposed to train their people to keep plutonium pieces small, keep them separated, keep everything under control to prevent this. But the thing is, plutonium has a half-life of 24,000 years, which means it remains radioactive for tens of thousands of years, and that is why nuclear waste storage is such a huge issue and such a complicated one to handle. Los Alamos National Lab has had a few oopsies and close calls over the years, but we'll talk about that in a bit. For now, back to Melissa Cassius. An investigation revealed that Melissa Cassius was seen on surveillance camera footage around 2 p.m., walking by a residence in Talpa. Now, this would have been about an hour after her daughter had seen her at work, at Sierra's work. And so the assumption is that after dropping off the sandwich to Sierra, Melissa went home, where she left all of her things, including the check that Sierra had just given her, and factory reset her own phones for some reason. Then she left the house on foot and walked eastbound along New Mexico Highway 518. She was wearing a turquoise shirt, blue jeans, and a maroon hoodie tied around her waist. Now, reportedly, surveillance footage was pulled from a business near Sierra's place of work, and Melissa was seen wearing the same outfit when she left after dropping lunch off to Sierra. So in that footage, Melissa's hair is down, she's wearing sunglasses, it looks like she has something in her hand, possibly her phone. In the stills released from the later surveillance video, after Melissa allegedly leaves her house on foot, It appears Melissa's hair is up and she has a backpack on. So about 15 minutes later, after she's seen on surveillance, a man who knew Melissa's family members was parked in his truck on the side of New Mexico 518, eating lunch and talking on the phone. And he claims he saw Melissa walk by his truck down the highway in the opposite direction of her home. After he finished eating, he started his truck and kept driving, and he claimed he saw Melissa again near the Carson National Forest sign on New Mexico 518. Now, at that time, this witness also reported that he saw a blue Dodge truck following Melissa as she walked. And when the eyewitness turned back to drive towards his own house, he said he saw that truck again, but he did not see Melissa. So Melissa's niece, Jasmine McMillan, received this tip by way of phone call at 9:47 p.m. on June 26th, and at that time, she was at Melissa's house with 2 state police officers. Jasmine claims she told them about what the man had seen, but she was interrupted by someone who told the state police that the woman this man had seen was not Melissa, and the police should not contact that witness. Now, reportedly, that someone was Melissa's husband, Mark Cassius, who claims he told the state police it was an inaccurate tip because the description of the woman was not correct. The witness described the woman he saw wearing something along the lines of a white t-shirt or sweater, and he said she was staggering across the road like she was hurt or intoxicated. Mark Cassius said his wife was not a drinker, and he does not suspect foul play because there were no signs of a struggle. Mark said, quote, "Melissa was not a weak lady. I mean, believe me, there would have been a fight, but I couldn't see anything. I'm a hunter, so when we went outside, I started looking for tracks. Right away, I started looking to see what vehicle tracks came in and if there was anything strange coming in or going out. If there was a fight, they're going to show toe tracks or heel tracks. Those weren't there," end quote. Now, it is odd to me that Mark Cassius would write off this witness sighting so quickly, considering his wife was missing. The sighting happened on the same highway she'd last been seen on surveillance, not just, someone saying they saw her on the highway. She was seen on surveillance on that highway, and he felt the absence of toe or heel tracks supported, an evidence of foul play. I don't understand that. Your wife's missing. You don't know where she is or what happened to her. Why are you so quick to write things off? And what are we doing talking about toe and heel tracks? This is out of control. There's no toe or heel tracks, therefore no one took her. Now, Melissa's niece, Jasmine McMillan, said that the police did eventually interview that eyewitness. They also tracked down the driver of the blue truck that the witness had seen following Melissa. And, quote, "The blue truck has been cleared. The police were able to track it down. There's no need to search for that blue truck. They contacted the driver and conducted an interview. They found it and have confirmed that it has nothing to do with Melissa's disappearance. We know she didn't get into a blue truck," end quote. I don't know how they know, once again, but something interesting that Jasmine McMillan, Melissa's niece, said. She said when the police located the truck and opened it, there was a Los Alamos National Lab badge inside. In fact, she said the badge fell out of the truck when the police opened it. But Jasmine said the badge didn't belong to Melissa, so don't worry about it. It's not connected to her. What? This is crazy. This is crazy, and you'll see why in a minute. So Sierra, Melissa's daughter, and Mark, Melissa's husband, they also believe that Melissa lied about forgetting her badge that morning, her security badge, because Mark had seen Melissa swipe in when they drove in, right? So the Los Alamos National Lab, it's a pretty high security clearance lab. What Mark is saying is you don't just have to swipe to get into the building or into a lab or any one of these buildings on the campus. You have to swipe before you can even drive up to it. And she had her badge because she was driving and she swiped it and we were able to drive up so she could drop me off. But then Mark and Sierra also seem to believe that Melissa left voluntarily due to personal or financial struggles. At least that's what they've claimed publicly. Sierra, I guess, had been in a car accident a few years prior. There was supposed to have been a settlement, and then it fell through. And Sierra said that her mother has a tendency to kind of suppress things, hold things in. Sierra and Mark have allegedly gone through Melissa's documents, and based on what they saw and found, they say that they feel she was experiencing pressure that they hadn't been aware of. What mother and wife isn't, though? Let's be honest. It's absolutely totally typical. In fact, I'd be surprised if Melissa was experiencing pressure that they were aware of, right? So Sierra told NBC News, quote, she was going through a huge amount of stress. There was a lot crumbling down on her that we didn't know about, end quote. But Melissa's side of the family, however, including her parents and her sister Trudy, and I think her niece Jasmine too, they do not really believe that she left her life behind of her own free will. They said Melissa loved her family, which was true. She was especially close to her daughter, Sierra. Mark, and Sierra had a trip planned to all go to the lake together on June 27th, the day after she vanished. I guess she was really excited about it. Sierra was really excited about it too. And Sierra says that her mother's family has been excluding herself and her father, Mark, from the searches, and that the state police are also leaving them in the dark. But even Sierra says it doesn't make sense why her mother would disappear, never giving any sign that she wanted to leave her home, leave her life, leave her family. Sierra said, quote, there's no way that she would just do this without telling me. Why wouldn't she leave me a note? Why wouldn't she text me? Why wouldn't she tell me? Even just like a hint, end quote. Exactly. Like you would have found a way to say goodbye to your daughter. You would have found a way to let her know, this isn't because I don't love you, right? Like you'd think that. You would think that. And the way that Melissa left everything behind, credit cards, cash, factory reset cell phones, where is she going? Where is she going? So Sierra said that her mother knew that, she was very excited about the upcoming lake trip, and Sierra had just graduated days before Melissa's disappearance. Also, Melissa's mother was getting a knee replacement surgery just a few days after Melissa disappeared, and Melissa and her sister were planning to, take care of their mother in the aftermath of the surgery, and Melissa was also planning to take the day off from work so that she could be at the hospital with her mother. Additionally, Melissa Cassius was very active. She was an avid hunter and well known in the local hunting and archery scene. She, her husband, and daughter would often traverse the forest near the highway right by where she vanished, and they would hunt and stuff in the forests. And according to reports, she was last seen walking on the highway, walking toward Carson National Forest, which is at the foot of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. So this forest is massive. It's a massive, rugged stretch of protected land that is one of the most wild areas in the entire Southwest. It's very quiet, very remote, more like a working wilderness than a tourist attraction. It's not some place you really go to have picnics. It's for more rugged things than that. So 4 days after Melissa vanished, search dogs from Taos Search and Rescue searched New Mexico 518, and several agencies searched an estimated 238 acres of Carson National Forest, including streams and both sides of New Mexico 518. Despite that, no sign of Melissa Cassius has ever been found. Now, I've heard a few creators claim that investigators found Melissa's blood in her bedroom. I cannot find that supported in any legitimate source, so I'm not sure where that information came from. If you're familiar with this case and please drop it in the comments. It looks like it may have originally been reported on the Crime Junkie podcast, but I literally cannot find that info anywhere. It could be true. I'm just saying I can't find it anywhere, so I don't want to tell you that it's true. So there were also reports of muddy boots and a pile of clothes found on a nearby roadside right around where Melissa went missing. But apparently Sierra, Melissa's daughter, has since spoken out and said those clothes did not belong to her mother. It has now been almost a year since Melissa Cassius vanished. And since law enforcement and federal authorities have been investigating this, I assume they have checked her credit card activity and all the other stuff that usually happens in these kinds of missing person cases where people think that they left of their own free will because of stress and either took their own life or wanted to start a new life. So if we are to believe that Melissa left of her own free will because of stress, what are we thinking happened here? Did she go out into Carson National Forest and kill herself without leaving anything behind to say goodbye to her loved ones or explain what was going on? Or are we to believe she, started a new life with a new identity and bank accounts, because that's so easy to do. Now, Melissa's position at Los Alamos National Lab links her to General William McCasland, who, as we know, was overseeing the Air Force Research Lab, which is headquartered in Ohio, but the Air Force Research Lab also includes Kirtland Air Force Base in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where McCasland held command for several years. The Air Force Research Laboratory works closely with Los Alamos National Lab on national security programs because Los Alamos, that lab is the steward of the United States nuclear arsenal. They also work on counterterrorism, cybersecurity, and intelligence analysis. So the lab houses some of the world's most powerful supercomputers and works on Joint Department of Defense classified projects with the Air Force Research Laboratory. Now, as we know, General McCaslin was deeply involved for decades with satellites, from designing and building them to dictating where they would be placed and what they would be focused on, to reading and interpreting the data, deciding what to do about that data once he read and interpreted it. The Air Force Research Lab is also heavily involved in space laser systems, and Los Alamos National Laboratory contributes radiation detection instruments along with space-based nuclear monitoring. Los Alamos has actually put instruments on satellites for decades to detect nuclear tests worldwide. So these sensors also detect radiation signatures in general, like on, in space and what's going on out there, and also missile launches. And they've done this in partnership with Sandia National Labs in California, right around the corner from where Monica Reza disappeared. Okay, so we have some overlapping themes here: space and nuclear power. What do those two things have in common? Or a better question would be, where do they overlap when it concerns the military, government, industrial complex? Remember, I told you that Los Alamos National Lab is responsible for producing pits, the plutonium core of nuclear weapons. Reportedly, Los Alamos has been under pressure in recent years to ramp up pit production. And in 2018, the U.S. government formally set a production mandate, directing the National Nuclear Security Administration to produce at least 80 pits a year. And the only place that could make any pits was Los Alamos National Laboratory. So understand, after the Cold War, pit production pretty much stopped, which it should have. But then in the early 2000s, they were being made again, but in very small numbers. And then suddenly in 2018, the government wanted 80 a year. And Los Alamos National Lab was like, we can't do that. We can't do that at all. We can barely make, a few a year. And the government was like, okay, fair. How about you do 30 and then we'll make more pits somewhere else? So then there were plans to build a plutonium processing plant at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. But that hasn't happened yet. It's still in the works. And so Los Alamos National Lab is being expected to now put out 60 pits a year. So the government was like, give us 80. And they were like, we can't do that. And then they were like, okay, do 30 and then we'll find and make another place to do it. But it's taking too long for that other place to be built and, put into a reality. So the government was like, all right, we'll just do 60. But realistically, once again, Los Alamos National Lab, they can't do that. They can't because, first of all, plutonium in high amounts is incredibly dangerous to work with, and that's why there's so many restrictions on it. But they're also working out of a 50-year-old facility that thankfully wasn't designed for large-scale pit production. Because remember, the Manhattan Project was like, let's make a couple bombs. They weren't like, let's make 80 a year. So most pit work at Los Alamos happens in a facility called PF4. It's small. There's only so many workstations that can fit in there. And so there's only so many people that can be inside at the same time safely. There's codes and rules and stuff, and for good reason, because working with plutonium comes along with these strict rules, like limits on how much material can be in one place and how many, feet each person working with plutonium has to be away from another person working with plutonium. Additionally, pit production requires highly specialized skills. These are rare, highly trained roles and training that it would take years for someone to go through. So faster production would mean more pressure on systems that are outdated, and more pressure means higher risks of mistakes. And when you're working with plutonium, you ideally want no mistakes, right? Mistakes are not only costly, but they're deadly. Now, allegedly, there hasn't been any massive radiation incidents at Los Alamos National Lab, at least not since the 1940s. When there was one, but there have been some pretty big issues. And honestly, I'm sure what we've heard, what the public has been informed of as far as the issues happening at Los Alamos National Lab is the tip of the iceberg. I guarantee you. So it's important to know that as of February 2026, for the first time since the 1970s, there are no legally binding limits on U.S. or Russian strategic nuclear arsenals. That means both countries can pretty much do whatever they want now. It's a free-for-all. And this, of course, raises concerns about a new global arms race. The New York Times reported, quote, "Today, Los Alamos is producing plutonium bomb cores, making the lab the linchpin of a $1.7 trillion federal effort to modernize the nation's nuclear weapons. But in doing so, the lab is creating new waste before dangerous legacy byproducts from the Cold War era have been properly mitigated. That waste often contains plutonium, uranium, or several other radioactive and chemical contaminants that pose environmental and human safety risks," end quote. Okay, legacy waste, what does that mean? So back in the day, I guess before people knew stuff about stuff, Los Alamos National Lab buried their nuclear and hazardous waste in unlined landfills, septic tanks, and firing sites. And the Energy Department estimates that roughly 500,000 cubic meters of radioactive legacy waste, which is the equivalent of about 200 Olympic-sized swimming pools, remains on the Los Alamos Lab campus. It also turns out that more than 2,000 drums of waste are being stored in tents in a 63-acre section of the lab's campus, and there's another place called Materials Disposal Area C, which is an unlined landfill that's stock full of chemicals, sludge from waste treatment plants, and objects contaminated with plutonium and uranium. Now, this area closed officially in 1974, which I guess means like we're not putting any more stuff there, but they haven't done anything with the stuff they already put there yet. And then in 2014, a radioactive waste drum containing plutonium burst open underground and radiation spread through parts of the facility. Over 20 employees were exposed and the entire facility shut down for nearly 2 years. Now, that's pretty much what they'll tell you. They'll be like, it's okay. The employees were exposed. They're okay. I don't know if those employees are okay. I don't even know their names. Let me see that they're okay. You know what I mean? Because plutonium radiation exposure, no joke. All right. And then, well, if it burst underground, did that radiation get into, I don't know, nearby water systems? They'll say no. They'll say no, or they'll say that whatever water or whatever like ecosystem was sort of like affected by this, they already cleaned it up and they fixed it. But how do we know? Then they have to investigate what went wrong here. What went wrong here? I don't know. You're burying radioactive waste. So an investigation showed that the lab had used the wrong type of absorbent material. They had used organic kitty litter instead of non-organic kitty litter. Why are we using kitty litter at all? Why are we doing that? This is a high-tech research lab with the best supercomputers on Earth and government funding in the millions and billions probably. And the best option you can come up with to minimize moisture and radioactive waste is kitty litter. I think the stakes are a bit high here. Can we do better? Like, can you create something maybe? Like, come up with something, use some of your scientific brains there and at all the other places that you have access to come up with a better absorbent material for radioactive waste than kitty litter. And another concern outside of just, drums exploding and radioactive plutonium affecting people around, there's a huge legitimate concern of a major fire reaching an area that has all of this nuclear material waste just chilling in it. So in 2000, there was a prescribed burn forest fire in Los Alamos called the Cerro Grande fire. I hate the prescribed burn thing. They intentionally set fires. It's just insane to me, especially in dry areas like New Mexico and California. Like, they intentionally start fires, and I know they say that there's a reason why they do it, but it always ends up going wrong, doesn't it? Like it did with the Cerro Grande fire, which started as a controlled burn and became uncontrollable because of the usual suspects, high winds and drought conditions. Over 400 families in Los Alamos lost their homes as the fire spread over 59,000 acres, and structures at Los Alamos National Lab were destroyed and damaged. But as we know and have been told, The Los Alamos National Lab campus has untold amounts of nuclear waste buried there and here, as well as in the canyons around the campus. It's just everywhere. Now, the official word is that no areas with nuclear waste or material were affected by this, controlled fire. But here's the kicker. We wouldn't really know if anything was affected or if there was any kind of fallout from that because we wouldn't be able to see it. We wouldn't be worried about some huge explosion, right? We would be worried about this waste burning and then the burning debris and dust carrying radiation through the air, being breathed in by people, contaminating water, contaminating food. Radiation is invisible, odorless. It has no taste. It would look like normal wildfire smoke. Now, they say that extensive tests were done afterwards to put to rest concerns about contamination, and officials reported, quote, limited off-site radioactive release. And it's like, okay, sure, I believe you. I would personally like to see the reports of cancer and other weird illnesses around that area that have been on the uptick since this fire, because, like I said, they could tell us anything, that there was no radiation released into the air or, into the plants or into the water, but how would we know? Okay, so there's also been a lot of talk about space travel lately, going to the moon, building infrastructure on other planets, etc. And what do you know? This is crazy because as I'm writing this script, there are suddenly reports all over about NASA building its first ever nuclear reactor powered interplanetary spacecraft. So it looks like NASA wants to fly to Mars by the end of 2028, and they're going to use the Space Reactor 1 Freedom to do that. Quote, a successful mission would herald a new era in spaceflight, one in which traveling between Earth, the Moon, and Mars would be faster and easier than ever, and it might just give the U.S. the edge in the race against China, end quote. Yippee! Because that's always been what's so important to us, right? Getting there first, being the best. Oh, and that's not all, because NASA also wants to put nuclear reactors into orbit and on the Moon by 2030. Quote, for this tall order, NASA will have to join forces with the U.S. Department of Energy and the Department of Defense, end quote. Of course they will. Like, it's the first time NASA's going to have to join forces with the DOE and the DOD. Like, they want us to think NASA is an independent agency, but it's really not. Yes, it's not technically part of a department of the government like the Department of Defense, but it was created by Congress. And it is funded by federal money, which is taxpayer money. So it's like, oh, to do all this space stuff, a government agency will have to team up with other government agencies and spend more of our money. Like, stop. According to the White House Office of Science and Technology, quote, nuclear power in space will give us sustained electricity, heating, and propulsion essential to a permanent presence on the Moon, Mars, and beyond. End quote. People are starving, Kim. The Earth people fund NASA. Okay, can the Earth people have some of the money to make sure everyone here has a roof over their head and food in their stomach, and maybe our nuclear legacy waste is like cleaned up? I mean, everyone's excited about this. Like, this is crazy progress. We're doing so much to infinity and beyond. But we're talking about nuclear reactors here, so should we consider the dangers? Like, if a rocket fails as it leaves Earth, it could break apart in the atmosphere or crash, as has happened in the past, and then radioactive material would scatter and disperse, come back to Earth. If something's placed in orbit and later falls, which happens with satellites all the time, it could fall back to Earth. And yeah, some of the components could burn up upon re-entry, but others can survive and hit the ground and disperse, like when the Soviet satellite Cosmos 954 re-entered over Canada and scattered radioactive debris across a wide area in 1974. That satellite was powered by a nuclear reactor, and that's what it did. So, like, are we really rushing to be, like, first and cutting edge with this? Because once again, Russia already did it. But don't worry, a nuclear reactor on the moon can't explode. It would be more of a Chernobyl situation, but not as bad because there's no atmosphere and no oxygen. But still, I don't like all of these risks that these fancy nuclear reactor plans for the moon and Mars pose to Earth, the planet we currently live on. and the only one we can currently survive on, the one that has become a breeding and testing ground for nuclear technology, while you want to start over on a fresh new planet. So am I saying that Melissa Cassius had access to information or knowledge about something that led to her disappearance? I'm not saying that. Former FBI Assistant Director Chris Swecker, who was with the agency for 20 years, has said that he's concerned Melissa's case is part of this emerging and alarming pattern. And he said, quote, in a classified lab or just a high clearance lab, they would basically know what's going on. And it wouldn't be the first time their administrative assistant has been targeted, end quote. And Chris Swecker said that the FBI cannot have examined these cases in isolation and compartmentalize them as individual missing persons cases. He's saying the FBI can't look at this and all the things that connect these people and still decide that these are individual missing persons cases. Chris Swecker said that although the cases may not be connected, investigators need to be sure because critical technology could be at risk. Quote, I think you have to pull out all the resources necessary to look for links and look for potential espionage activities. That's where you start. End quote. And I agree, because I'm not saying Melissa Cassius was some special access program, super black op, high security kind of person. What I am saying is she worked at a lab where you already need to be a high security person before you can even go inside. And as Chris Swecker said, these labs, these people are working together every day, a lot of times for years, decades. They see each other. They are family. And when things are happening inside the lab, it's like what happens in the lab stays in the lab. They're talking to each other about things. They're, going over things. Things are being overheard. The administrative assistant part of Melissa Cassius's job isn't an immediate she didn't know anything. She was just a secretary. I'm not going to disrespect secretaries or administrative assistants like that. Sometimes these are the people who know the most about what's going on because they know everybody's information. They know what everybody's working on, and they're putting it together. And additionally, Melissa's husband, Mark, did have a much higher level job. And I'm sorry, but Mark's just acting a little weird in the wake of Melissa going missing because he seems very willing to say, she was under a lot of pressure and she just walked away and left. They were married for 25 years. It just seems odd that you know somebody for that long and you think that that's what they would do without saying goodbye to you, without a word to you. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So once again, like General McCaslin's wife, going and saying on the 911 call, I think he wanted to not be found, and then coming out afterwards and saying, hey, my husband didn't have access to any high clearance things anymore. That's not true technically, because General McCaslin was still actively working in an area where he absolutely would have still had access to a lot of things. And the things that he already knew were enough. They were enough to make him a target. And he doesn't need to have access to new stuff. What he knew about was already enough to make him a target. It feels like General McCaslin's wife and Melissa Cassius's husband are sort of following a script. They're publicly saying what they're being told that they should be publicly saying, if you know what I mean. I'm not saying they're bad people. I'm saying that both General McCaslin's wife and Melissa Cassius's husband also have their own connections to each specific place. General McCaslin's wife has her connections to NASA, and Mark Cassius has his connections to Los Alamos National Lab, right? So we are going to stay on the subject of space and switch our focus to something that is very interesting, and that is a very unusual amount of meteor activity in recent months. And then we're going to introduce our next person who could be very possibly connected to all of this. Okay, so meteors. I mean, I don't want to feel like I'm giving you an elementary school lesson, but I had to brush up and, figure out the difference between meteors and meteorites and all of this stuff. So meteors are any space rock burning up in the Earth's atmosphere, usually small pieces of space debris that gain friction as they heat up. They glow, they burn up completely. We call them shooting stars. And then we have fireballs. So a fireball is a meteor on steroids that is exceptionally bright, brighter than Venus. They are often caused by larger pieces of debris, and they can break apart dramatically, leave smoke trails, and sometimes produce sonic booms. And then there's something called a bolide. So a bolide, apparently, is a very bright fireball that can be seen during the day. So I think it's the same thing as a fireball. They just are saying it's like a really bright one. Now, as we know, planet Earth is constantly getting hit by space debris, and every year we get some fireballs too. But Earth is mostly empty from a human perspective. There are huge swaths of uninhabited areas, and I guess 71% of the Earth is ocean. So most of these fireballs happen when no one is around to see them. And the ones that make it to Earth usually end up at the bottom of the ocean or like in the middle of the desert, someplace no one sees them. Now, meteorite producing fireballs, meaning events where fragments of the meteor survive the atmosphere and reach the ground, those are far more rare. And on average, they happen between 5 to 10 times globally. So what I mean is like a meteor or fireball that makes it to Earth and hits something or hits the ground and makes a crater. Very rare. So as you may know, or you may not know, because some people aren't paying attention to this stuff, but I love space and I always am. So as you may or may not know, fireball sightings in the first months of 2026 have undeniably surged. According to the American Meteor Society and also our own eyes, because the videos have been all over social media. So the American Meteor Society put out a report saying that during 2026 Q1, the first 3 months of 2026, the Earth experienced 2,322 total fireball events, not just shooting stars, fireball events, which is over double from previous years. January was mildly elevated, February showed a noticeable increase, and then March is when things got really weird with the fireballs. And some of these fireballs were also accompanied by sonic booms, which means the meteors were bigger, denser, and they went deeper into the atmosphere. And then they make a really loud noise, like a rocket is shooting towards you. So on March 2nd, a fireball crossed Louisiana, Texas, Mississippi, and Arkansas, going 30,000 miles per hour. It traveled west at approximately 8.3 miles per second, covering a distance of 41 miles before it disintegrated above the Georgia Pacific Wildlife Management Area at an altitude of 27 miles. That's 27 miles above the ground, about 4 to 5 times higher than commercial planes fly. Now, NASA confirmed entry of the fireball at 48 miles above Chickasaw, Louisiana, and they said, quote, "This meteor was not associated with any currently active meteor shower and was part of the sporadic meteor complex," end quote. That basically means, hey, every year, usually around spring, like actually around this time, we have certain meteor showers and we expect these and we know where they come from. But when they say like the sporadic meteor activity, it basically means we don't really know where this meteor came from. But we do know it wasn't part of any identified meteor shower that we're already aware of. So on March 3rd, 2026, a fireball became visible 58 miles over Coquitlam, British Columbia. It was moving 75,000 miles per hour. It traversed 44 miles through the upper atmosphere before disintegrating at an altitude of 41 miles above Green Mantle Mountain. Energy measured by Space Lightning Mapper on the GOES-18 satellite was 10 tons of TNT. So it was moving pretty fast. It was visible for quite a while, and it broke apart midair with the energy of a small bomb. On March 4th, 2026, there was another visible fireball seen over areas of Central Europe, including Switzerland, France, Germany, and Italy. Then on March 8th, a very bright fireball streaked across the sky, visible across Western Europe, including Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Portugal, and Spain. It was visible for about 6 seconds, left a glowing trail, and then broke apart into fragments midair. The brightness magnitude was estimated to be between -15 and -20, hundreds of times brighter than the full moon. Over 3,000 reports of this were logged, and many witnesses heard sonic booms and thought it looked like an explosion. And here's the thing, several structures were actually struck by pieces of the fireball or the meteor, right? Because when it explodes, then those pieces where it exploded, because it was so close to Earth, start going off in all different directions, and hitting things. And this included one large football-sized piece that crashed through the roof of a house. Apparently, there were several structures that were damaged from the pieces of this fireball meteor. So the European Space Agency's Planetary Defense Team opened a formal investigation and reported that the object was a few meters in diameter, a size class that impacts Earth infrequently and, quote, is often undetected by current sky surveys. End quote. So Earth is monitored by a bunch of things, our space defense system, a combination of ground-based radars, optical telescopes, and space-based infrared sensors designed to detect both natural near-Earth objects and man-made space debris like dead satellites that could affect us. So we have the Space Surveillance Network. This is a U.S. military system that uses sensors and radar. We have NASA's Atlas, a network of ground-based telescopes capable of searching the entire dark sky every 24 hours to identify near-Earth objects that could pose an impact hazard. We also have something that I've never heard of before that was just brought to my attention when I was researching this. It's called Space Fence, brought to us by none other than Lockheed Martin. We've talked about them. Space Fence is allegedly a powerful radar system run by the United States Space Force that constantly scans the sky to detect and track anything orbiting the Earth, and it is positioned near the equator so it can see a huge portion of Earth's orbit as the planet rotates. Lockheed Martin claims that Space Fence is the world's most advanced radar that can track objects as small as a marble, but I guess not if they're moving as fast as these meteors have been moving, allegedly. On March 8th, 2026, another fireball was spotted at the Maryland-Pennsylvania border. A few days later, on March 11th, another one over New York. The same day, another one that was seen in France, Germany, England, and the Netherlands. On March 15th, 2026, a slow-moving fireball was seen over western Turkey in the Yusak province. It was visible for more than 20 seconds, which is a long time to be visible, and a preliminary analysis suggests the object may have been an Earth-grazing meteor, a rare type of fireball that skims the upper atmosphere at very shallow angles. Sounds great. We love rare things. Also on March 15th, a fireball with an audible sonic boom sped over Ohio. It was caught on a doorbell camera, but space wasn't done with Ohio yet because 2 days later, a fireball 6 feet across, weighing 17,000 pounds and traveling at 44,000 miles an hour, detonated 50 miles above Lake Erie with a force of 250 tons of TNT. This one was also accompanied by a big sonic boom. It was visible during the day for 7 seconds, and small pieces of it landed around Medina County. Then on March 21st, a 1-ton fireball, 3 feet in diameter, entered the atmosphere above Stagecoach, Texas, north of Houston. It moved southeast at 35,000 miles per hour before breaking apart 29 miles above Bammel, near Cypress Station. The energy released was 26 tons of TNT, and the sonic boom was heard across the greater Houston metro area. And felt, I would assume. I think a sonic boom can be heard and felt. So part of that meteor, it broke up and smashed through the roof of Sherry James's home and ricocheted around an upstairs bedroom in Spring, Texas. And Sherry James cracks me up because she gave an interview and she was like, yeah, it crashed through my house, went through my roof. And when I first saw it, I was like, oh no. I'm a science fiction fan. Like, that could be a space egg. I don't know what's in that. I'm not touching it, right? She was like, I'm not going to touch this friggin' potential space egg. Who knows what's going to come out of it? She was funny. Good sport. And then the Ponderosa Fire Department, they went to Sherry's house and they recovered a football-sized rock with a shiny black exterior, and it was sent in for analysis. March 23rd, California, another fireball. That same day, Southern Oregon. March 24th, Michigan. March 27th, Ohio again. March 29th, Northern Washington. Fireball, fireball, fireball. What the hell is going on? Because this is not normal. The American Meteor Society, who have been reporting on fireballs for the longest, they analyzed the data. And their lead analyst said, quote, what this is a measurable change in the AMS fireball data that we do not yet fully understand. After years of stable baseline activity, something appears to have shifted in Q1 2026, and the signal is consistent across multiple metrics: witness counts, sonic booms, long-duration sighting volume, and the distribution of event sizes. end quote. So they're saying, yeah, something's changed. Definitely, without a doubt. We couldn't tell you what. And it's not, attributed to one thing. It's not just like more people are seeing it or it's the time of the season. Like this is definitely odd. So these researchers, they then mapped the flight paths backward through the sky. They computed radiance for 61 trajectory resolved events in Q1 of 2026 and compared them with a baseline set from 2021 through 2025. And in the full comparison set, there were 255 events with valid trajectory solutions. Basically, they believed they could identify where the meteors had come from. So 255 of these events from that whole sample size, which I believe would have been 2021 to 2026, they believe it comes from an area of space that we already know about, that we already get meteors from, and it's called the Anthelion, which is an area directly opposite the sun. So in 2026, 12 Q1 events fell into that zone. But in prior years, the events from that zone, the Anthelion zone, ranged from 1 to 6. So still, even though it's like, yeah, we know where they're coming from, it still means that the events of 2026 had doubled from prior reporting. Even though we know where they're coming from, there's still more of them coming. So AMS decided that the March 11th France fireball came from there. The New York fireball came from there, and so did the California one. And these aren't necessarily asteroids coming from the Anthelion zone. They are debris that appear to come from that direction. And like I said, basically the Anthelion zone is just a direction in the sky where lots of normal debris already comes from, so it's common to see meteors coming from there. Even so, like I said, from past years, Q1 in 2026 still doubled. We know where they're coming from. There's just more coming from there than have ever happened before. Okay, so let's go back to the sample size. They're looking at these meteors. Where could they possibly be coming from? They've determined where some of them are coming from, but then they also found out that 11 2026 Q1 events came from a different direction. That was not the Anthelion zone. And these objects were coming in at steep angles, like they were dropping in from above instead of moving along the normal paths. And that's where the Germany and Ohio fireballs stood out, because we have remnants from those fireballs because they landed in people's houses and stuff. We have remnants from both Germany and Ohio that have been analyzed, and the Ohio rock is believed to be something called eucrite, which is rare, and the Germany rock is believed to be something called diogenite. So both are believed to have come from Vesta, one of the largest asteroids in the belt that sits between Jupiter and Mars, the asteroid belt. Eucrite is an ancient lava rock that comes from the crust of Vesta, and diogenite comes from deeper inside Vesta. So here's the thing with Vesta. It's believed to have layers like a planet. In fact, it was once called a dwarf planet, and they kind of just assumed that the gravity in the asteroid belt prevented Vesta and the other kind of rocks and sort of semi-planets floating around the asteroid belt from coming together and forming into a full planet like Earth. But they do believe that Vesta was like an infant, like what a planet would have become, what Earth probably looked like before it became Earth. And Vesta had volcanic activity, a lot of it, billions of years ago. So it's believed that at some point, billions of years ago, when all this volcanic activity was happening, Vesta got blasted by a large asteroid, and that impact caused a part of the crust to be sent off into space, where it drifted through the asteroid belt for hundreds of millions of years until it migrated into a near-Earth orbit. So the American Meteor Society says that the material that's found in both the Germany and Ohio fireballs came from Vesta. But get this, the two events had an angular separation of 98.2 degrees, which means they came from opposite parts of the sky, not only opposite parts of the sky, but on unrelated orbits. And that might sound like a weird thing, because it kind of is, since it happened so close together, right? Even the American Meteor Society says, quote, 2 HED falls in 9 days is statistically remarkable, but they are not from a common stream, end quote. Right? Which makes it even more remarkable, like almost impossible to happen. To even have 2 meteorites that come from Vesta is rare. 2 in 9 days is unheard of. So to understand why this is weird and rare, we have to know how a rock can drift in space for millions of years. and then all of a sudden decide it wants to head to Earth. So the first step in this millions of years process would look like Vesta getting hit by something large and impactful, which we've already talked about, pieces of Vesta breaking off, and then starting their drift around the asteroid belt between Jupiter and Mars. These pieces would be exposed to tiny forces that gradually shifted them around, like sunlight heating them unevenly, slowly pushing them in slightly different directions, a tiny push that changes the orbit of the pieces. They're also going to be impacted by small gravitational tugs from planets, extremely slow changes, but constant. Eventually, the pieces would reach a gravitational doorway in the asteroid belt. And these unstable zones, these doorways in the belt, are called resonances with Jupiter. How pretty. So when the pieces of Vesta drift into one of these doorways, it's like they suddenly stepped on a moving walkway, the moving sidewalk at the airport, and their path has suddenly changed. And once that happens, things speed up dramatically. Jupiter's gravity starts pulling harder, the orbit becomes stretched and chaotic, and now instead of these pieces slowly drifting aimlessly, they get flung into a new orbit. And that orbit might now cross Earth's path, which brings it close to the inner solar system, and eventually the pieces from Vesta might hit Earth, right? But these two Vesta pieces came from two different directions on two different orbits, and they would have had to have gone through all of those steps I just went through separately. They weren't taking the same moving sidewalk. That is a lot of things to happen and a lot of things to go right for both of those Vesta pieces to shoot towards Earth within 9 days of each other on completely different orbits, when it's quite rare to get pieces of Vesta shooting towards the Earth to begin with. Which is why the people at the American Meteor Society have acknowledged that something has changed. Now, I do want to explore that further, but first we have to return to why all of this matters for the purposes of our story today. On February 16th, 2026, 67-year-old Carl Grillmeyer was shot dead on his front porch in Antelope Valley, California. Police found Carl on his front porch, a gunshot wound to his torso. Later that day, the Palmdale Sheriff's Office was investigating Carl's death when they got a carjacking call that led them to 29-year-old Freddie Snyder. Snyder was detained, and then he was later arrested not only for the carjacking, but for the murder of Carl Grillmeyer. All news reports say that there's no evidence that the two men knew each other, and they have no idea what Freddie's motive would be to kill Carl. But we do know that 2 months prior to Carl's death, on December 20th, 2025, police were called after someone saw Freddie Snyder on Carl Grillmeyer's property carrying a rifle. And as it turns out, that rifle was both loaded and unregistered, and Freddie was arrested on felony weapons charges. He told police that he lived a few miles away and he was just walking to the post office with a loaded unregistered rifle, and he said the rifle was to ward off animals, but reportedly, when he was picked up, he was walking in the opposite direction of the post office. So it's unknown who called 911 to alert police about Freddie Snyder that day in December when he was on Carl's property. It was not Carl Grillmeyer, who reportedly, according to, I believe it was his wife, she said he did not feel unsafe. He did not want to press charges against Freddie. There wasn't any immediate threat. However, since Freddie had a loaded unregistered weapon, he was still going to be charged with something after that arrest. But despite the seriousness of this offense, especially in California, Freddie was released shortly after his December 2025 arrest under California Penal Code 1385. Now, apparently, this is a provision that allows judges to dismiss or reduce charges in the interest of justice, which is a blanket term for whatever reason we want to, release this person for. We don't have to give a reason. And by the time Freddie Snyder returned to Carl Grillmeyer's property in February of 2026, prosecutors had dropped the charges completely. We don't know who the judge was that allowed Freddie Snyder to be released. We don't know why prosecutors dropped all the charges. I do know that they usually aren't soft on gun-related offenses in California, so the rest of it is a mystery to me. I don't even know what the hell is going on with Freddie Snyder, because last I heard, he'd been given a $2 million bail. He was still in custody, and his arraignment was scheduled for March 26, 2026, and then it was rescheduled to April 29th, which, when I'm filming this, is next week. But to be honest, I can't find anything about Freddie, who he was, what he did. No one who knew him who came forward and said, oh, this is so unlike him. I've known Freddie since high school. Or, yeah, we knew Freddie was going to do something like this. He was a crazy loner type in high school. Nothing It's like he doesn't exist. Please, if someone knows Freddie, tell me something about him that proves he's not a ghost or a made-up person that was created to have a reason or an excuse for why Carl Grillmeyer was shot on his front porch. All the police are saying is they don't know what his motive was, and they don't believe that he knew Carl Grillmeyer. So the early news reports said that Carl had worked at Caltech as an astronomer and astrophysicist for 30 years, that he was brilliant, and that the field of astronomy had lost a great figure. Carl lived out in the remote Antelope Valley area so that he could build an observatory at his home. He wanted to live way out in the desert because it was darker there at night, better for seeing the sky, and he loved seeing the sky. So who was Carl Grillmeyer? And how does he fit into our story? Carl was born in Calgary in 1959. He earned his Master of Science degree in astronomy from the University of Victoria in 1986. He was awarded the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada PhD Scholarship Award, and he earned his doctorate from Australian National University in 1993. As a graduate student, Carl worked as a data analyst at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, Maryland, and on the International Ultraviolet Explorer at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. Carl also worked on the Hubble telescope's Wide Field and Planetary Camera, the first and second version. As someone who was interested in space and the stars since he was a child, Carl Grillmeyer would have been living his best life. But already in the early 90s, we have Carl Grillmeyer linked to several things that we've already talked about. So the Space Telescope Institute is an organization that runs and manages some of NASA's biggest space telescopes. Carl was a data analyst, which meant he would be handling raw telescope data, images of space and planets and stars, and he would be responsible for turning those images into something that scientists could trust. His main focus was instrument and data calibration and correction for space telescopes. So he made sure the images that the telescopes were getting were accurate and the conclusions were reliable. He was the person who fixed the lens, corrected the image, made sure the pictures were accurate before any scientist studied them. By 1994, Carl was in Hawaii at the W.M. Keck Observatory, studying galaxies and globular clusters, which are dense balls of very old stars, and he did this using the Hubble Space Telescope. He was really interested in globular star clusters because they are like fossils of galaxy formation, and you can learn how galaxies are formed by studying them. He also studied nearby galaxies, including the Milky Way and Andromeda. He actually helped map the Milky Way. He discovered and named dozens of stellar streams in the Milky Way, which are remnants from ancient collisions between the Milky Way and other galaxies. Carl began his early work on imaging exoplanets, which are planets that orbit around other stars outside our solar system. So he was basically looking at other planets like Earth that were rotating around stars like our sun outside of our solar system. And he was trying to find like water on these planets. He did find water on some of these exoplanets. And he was also solving the problem of how to actually see these exoplanets because it's very hard. Planets are very faint and the stars they're revolving around are very bright. So like if you were in a different solar system or a different galaxy and you were trying to see the Earth, it would be hard based on how bright our sun is. In 2007, in one of his most impactful findings, Carl was the lead author on a publication that captured for the first time enough light from exoplanets to identify molecules in their atmosphere. And that goes to the whole finding water on these exoplanet things. So over his lifetime, Carl would actually publish 147 peer-reviewed papers. But 10 years before he published his paper in 2007, Carl joined the Infrared Processing and Analysis Center at the California Institute of Technology, from here on out known as IPAC and Caltech, because I'm not saying all those words again. Okay, so according to IPAC's website, quote, IPAC at Caltech partners with NASA, NSF, JPL, and the worldwide research community to advance exploration of our universe, end quote. Okay, so here are some acronyms we all know well that have popped up and will pop up countless times as we continue to explore the subject. NASA, the National Science Foundation, and of course, NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab, JPL, managed by Caltech, funded by the government. After his death, Caltech posted a nice memorial for Carl Grillmeyer, and it said, quote, over the course of nearly 30 years at IPAC, Grillmere worked on numerous projects, including as a quality assurance scientist and pipeline operator of the NEOWISE Science Data Center. NEOWISE was a NASA mission that used a space telescope to hunt for asteroids and comets in our solar system, including those that could impact Earth. He also served as the instrument characterization specialist for NASA's upcoming Near-Earth Object Surveyor mission. End quote. Okay. So Joe Massaro, NEO-Surveyor lead scientist at IPAC, said that Grillmere had recently begun a project to test new instrumentation at Caltech's Palomar Observatory to monitor for meteor impacts on the moon's surface during an upcoming lunar eclipse. So let's pause for a moment, get some information, get some context, said a lot of things that maybe some of you understand, but I didn't understand upon my first read. All right, so what's NEOWISE? Carl was instrumental in, being a part of NEOWISE. So NEOWISE was a NASA space telescope that searched for asteroids using infrared light, heat, instead of visible light. Most telescopes see sunlight reflected off of objects, but NEOWISE looked for heat given off by objects, which means it could detect darker asteroids or planets, exoplanets, that don't reflect much light, and objects that might be missed by regular telescopes. So for over 11 years, the polar bear-sized NEOWISE scanned the entire sky 23 times. It captured 27 million infrared images, discovered 215 near-Earth objects, including 2020's famous NEOWISE comet and the first known Trojan asteroid, and it observed thousands more. In August of 2024, NEOWISE was shut down. NASA claimed that solar activity had dragged it into a lower orbit, and they expected it to burn up in the atmosphere by the end of the year. Now, around that same time, it was announced that they were already working on a replacement, the NEO-Surveyor, a NASA mission designed to discover and characterize near-Earth objects that pose potential threats to Earth. This spacecraft consists of a single scientific instrument, a 50-centimeter in diameter telescope operating at 2 heat-sensing infrared wavelengths that can detect the dark asteroids that are the hardest to find. So after its expected launch in 2027, NASA says the NEO-Surveyor will carry out a 5-year baseline survey to find at least 2/3 of the near-Earth objects larger than 140 meters or about 460 feet. So these are objects large enough to cause major regional damage in the event of an Earth impact. Now, at the time of his death, Carl Grillmere was serving as the instrument characterization specialist for NEO-Surveyor, which means he would have been figuring out how the instrument behaved, how accurate it was, where it made errors. He would have been the one actively testing the instruments of the NEO-Surveyor before launch, figuring out if the sensors were measuring heat correctly and if they were sensitive enough to detect faint asteroids. Carl would have also been responsible for calibrating the data, making sure the brightness readings were accurate, and most importantly, that the object sizes were measured correctly. And then if he found errors, he would have to correct them so that scientists didn't misinterpret the data coming from the mission. Carl Grillmere had a very important job to do with NEO-Surveyor before it launched. Some might say actually the most important job in the mission. Like, if he doesn't do his job right, nothing matters. And given all his work with past missions like the Hubble telescope and his expertise with finding dark things in space, Carl Grillmere was the perfect person for this very important job. Okay, so like I said, I zoomed out. I looked at all of this. I took it all in. The unusual uptick in large asteroids coming at the Earth all of a sudden, and making it past the instruments that were designed to spot them, our planetary defense systems. Some of these burned up as fireballs in the atmosphere, putting on a great show for all of us and making for some cool TikTok videos, and some of them actually made it to the surface, crashing into people's homes. And I looked at the sudden interest in the moon, when in reality, let's be honest, who's been talking about the moon lately? It's been decades since anyone has even really talked about the moon, except, people online talking about how we never went there. The government said that we went there back in the day, and then that was it. It was like they just wanted to get there, say they could, and then there was no further inclination to do anything with the moon at all. And then they said we didn't have the technology, and then they said we didn't have to go back to the moon because it wasn't important, it didn't hold scientific importance. They didn't care about the moon. They got there, allegedly, then they didn't want to go back. They didn't talk about it. They were not concerned with the moon until this year, though, with Artemis. So according to available information, the formal Artemis program was established in 2017. And then in March of 2019, the program received new direction to accelerate the return of humans to the lunar surface by 2024. What happened in 2019? It kind of seems like in 2019, that was also around the time when the government told the Los Alamos National Lab, hey, you need to make us 80 pits a year now. We need a bunch of nuclear weapons or nuclear reactors. We need these pits. For whatever reason the government wants to use them for, they need a lot of them. So in 2019, the government's suddenly expanding their nuclear program, and they're also telling NASA, hey, we need to get humans back to the moon by 2024. Now, NEOWISE, which remember was the predecessor to NEOSURVEYOR, that's the one that they think is going to burn up in the atmosphere, so it's really not working anymore. NEOWISE first launched in 2009, which means that they had to have been building it by the early 2000s. So then I started looking into reports about asteroids that have popped up within the last few decades that might be an issue for Earth. And then I found out about Apophis, an enormous asteroid named after the ancient Egyptian god of evil and destruction. Because why not? For those who watched my GATE program video last October, you'll remember that we talked about how so many previous GATE students mentioned how odd it was that they did so many studies into and projects on ancient Egypt, even learning to read and decipher hieroglyphics. NASA seems obsessed with not only ancient Egypt, but Greek and Roman mythology as well. We should definitely talk about that one day, but we need to talk about Apophis right now, something that has been in the news again a lot recently, even though it was discovered way back in 2004, right around the time NASA was putting together their NEOWISE mission. Okay, so Apophis, this thing is huge, approximately 1,100 to 1,200 feet wide, which is roughly the size of the Eiffel Tower. In 2005, it was reported, quote, scientists are monitoring the progress of a 390-meter wide asteroid discovered last year that is potentially on a collision course with the planet and are imploring governments to decide on a strategy for dealing with it, end quote. So it's discovered in 2004. By 2005, scientists have found out about the discovery. They're looking into it. They're monitoring it. And they're like, we should do something about this. It doesn't look good. And they're all over the world, scientists in different countries and different geographical locations. They're imploring their own governments, we got to figure something out, very Armageddon. So this article goes on to say, quote, NASA has estimated that an impact from Apophis would release more than 100,000 times the energy released in the nuclear blast over Hiroshima. Thousands of square kilometers would be directly affected by the blast, but the whole of Earth would see the effects of the dust released into the atmosphere, end quote. So in 2005, this is an article from The Guardian, by the way, this Guardian article goes on to say that scientists are insisting that there's actually very little time left to make a decision about what to do. And at a recent meeting of experts in near-Earth objects in London, scientists said it could take decades to design, test, and build the technology to deflect the asteroid. Meteorite expert Monica Grady said, quote, it's a question of when, not if, a near-Earth object collides with Earth. Many of the smaller objects break up when they reach the Earth's atmosphere and have no impact. However, a near-Earth object larger than 1 kilometer wide will collide with Earth every few 100,000 years, and a near-Earth object larger than 6 kilometers, which could cause mass extinction, will collide with Earth every 100 million years. We are overdue for a big one, end quote. So Monica is talking about a very specific asteroid and collision. We're going to talk about that in a second, but I looked it up, and I was curious as to what is the largest asteroid impact in Earth's history. And it is something I never heard of. It's called the Verdiford asteroid, which struck South Africa roughly 2 billion years ago. It was approximately 15 to 20 kilometers wide and created a crater that is estimated to have been 180 to 300 kilometers wide. So the experts think that is nearly double the size of the asteroid that Monica is talking about. She's talking about the asteroid that hit the Yucatan Peninsula about 66 million years ago, the one that caused a mass extinction and took out 75% of life on Earth, including the dinosaurs. I guess now some people don't even believe in dinosaurs, so I don't even know what to do here because I'm getting yelled at in the comment section for believing that we landed on the moon. And now I said something about dinosaurs, and people are going to be like, you idiot. Dinosaurs never existed. All right, so humans have only existed for roughly 300,000 years. So we haven't witnessed an asteroid that extreme, like the one that hit the Yucatan Peninsula. But there have been smaller impacts, like the one in June of 1908, where witnesses reported a fireball streaking across the sky, followed by a powerful shockwave that knocked people off their feet hundreds of kilometers away. The impact also flattened over 2,000 square kilometers of forest in Siberia, Russia, and the explosion produced bright night skies visible as far as Europe and Asia. But in 2005, when they were talking about Apophis, these scientists were saying, hey, we have this massive asteroid, and there's a chance that it's going to hit us, at some point. At first, they were saying 2036. And if it does, that would be an issue, not just for the area it lands, but for the Earth in general, due to the dust being blasted into the atmosphere. Because you see, it's not the asteroid hitting that leads to an extinction event. It's all the stuff that happens in the aftermath. When an asteroid of that size hits Earth, the impact releases an enormous burst of energy. It sends shockwaves through the crust, triggering massive earthquakes and launching debris high into the atmosphere and even into space. Molten rock and a bunch of other stuff rain back down onto the planet, superheating the atmosphere and igniting widespread global wildfires. At the same time, the impact into oceans generates colossal tsunamis that devastate coastlines around the globe. These violent effects, while destructive, are only the beginning. The longer-term effects are what will drive the mass extinction. Dust, soot from global wildfires, and sulfur-rich gases blasted into the atmosphere spread around the planet, forming a thick veil that's going to block the sunlight for months or even years. Without sunlight, what happens? Temperatures drop. Photosynthesis nearly stops, causing planets to die off, not grow anymore, which obviously disrupts the food chain of animals and humans. This is followed by acid rain and climate instability, something called an impact winter, which happens after rapid cooling from a lack of sunlight, and basically an impact winter. It's like always winter. Nothing's growing. It's hard to kind of survive, especially if infrastructure is destroyed and you don't have things like heat in your house. So the Guardian article says that Apophis was intermittently tracked since its discovery in June of 2024, but in December it started causing serious concern. Quote, projecting the orbit of the asteroid into the future, astronomers had calculated that the odds of it hitting the Earth in 2029 were alarming. As more observations came in, the odds got higher. End quote. So in 2005, people who knew what they were talking about seemed pretty concerned about this asteroid. And when Apophis was discovered in June of 2004, initial calculations gave it a 2.7% chance of hitting Earth in 2029. That's not a small number. It's like 1 in 37 chance. It achieved the highest ever rating on the Torino scale, which is the planetary threat measurement system. By late 2004, it had reached level 4 out of 10, which is the highest any asteroid has ever been rated in recorded history. Then more observations started to come in. When people got worried, more observations came in. And then the 2029 impact was ruled out. But then 2036 became the concern. Then 2036 was ruled out. Then 2068 became the concern. Then in 2021, 2068 was ruled out, and NASA declared no impact risk for at least 100 years. We're okay for at least 100 years. Every time they say we're safe, though, a new window of concern opens, gets studied, and then gets closed until the next one. Apparently, there are several time periods that we need to be concerned about when it comes to Apophis, though. So on Friday, April 13th, 2029, and yes, that is genuinely a Friday the 13th. The universe has a sense of humor or hates us. I don't know which one at this point. On that date, Friday the 13th, in April of 2029, Apophis will pass within approximately 19,000 miles of Earth's surface. And that makes me sick. To think of how close it will be, it makes me sick. I'm going to put it in perspective. Many of our satellites, they orbit at around 22,000 miles up. So this thing will pass closer to Earth than many of our own satellites. It will be visible to the naked eye all over the world. and it will move across the sky fast enough to track with your eyes. Its brightness will peak at magnitude 3.1, bright enough to see without a telescope on a clear night. And like I said, that is extraordinarily close for an object this size. An asteroid of this size passing this close happens only once in 800 years on average, but NASA says it's not going to hit us. We're going to be okay. They say that when Apophis passes Earth in 2029, the pull of Earth's gravity will significantly change the asteroid's orbit around the sun. Essentially, Earth's gravity grabs it, bends its path, and sends it off on a slightly different trajectory than it arrived on. That altered trajectory is then what determines every subsequent close approach. So basically, understand what I'm telling you, whatever NASA tells us about future risk is entirely dependent, in my opinion, based on what I've read and looked into, entirely dependent on what happens during that 2029 flyby. And we won't know the precise outcome until it actually happens. On March 30th, 2036, Apophis will pass Earth at a much further distance of about 8.4 million kilometers, more than 20 times the distance between Earth and the Moon. So 2036 is not as close of a call by any stretch, it's just another pass. NASA and ESA, which is the European Space Agency, they both say there's no impact risk in 2036. Around April 19th or the 20th of 2051, Apophis will pass about 6 million kilometers from Earth. That's the first time since 2029 it will come within 10 million kilometers of our planet. So 2051 is the next genuinely close-ish approach after 2029, though still nowhere near as dramatic and close as 2029, nowhere near. Now here's the kicker. For years after Apophis was discovered, scientists couldn't rule out a potential impact in 2068. The reason was that the 2029 flyby changes Apophis's orbit in ways that are hard to predict precisely, and early models showed there was a small but real possibility the altered orbit could actually set up an Earth impact on April 12th, 2068. So when Apophis passes in 2029, Earth changes its orbit, and that changed orbit could set it up to come back and hit us in 2068. Now, in March of 2021, NASA used radar observations from Goldstone and the Green Bank Observatory to officially rule out any impact risk for at least the next 100 years, including 2068. That's what they say, at least. But like I said, the 2029 flyby itself introduces new variables that scientists won't be able to fully calculate until after it happens. So the 100-year all clear that NASA issued in 2021 is based on orbital models calculated before the 2029 gravity interaction occurs. After 2029, those models will need to be recalculated entirely based on the new trajectory. This means we genuinely won't know what Apophis does after 2029 until 2029 happens. And honestly, I'm not even sure that I believe it's not going to hit us in 2029 because of how close it's going to be. There's a lot of factors here. There's a lot of things happening. My food for thought for you, my question to you is, if NASA and the government knew that this asteroid was going to hit us, whether in 2029 or 2036 or 2050 or whatever, would they tell us? Obviously, they would not, and that's for many reasons. Widespread panic, of course, but also the smaller things that no one thinks about. If you knew an enormous asteroid was going to make impact with Earth in the next 3 years or 10 years or whatever, would you even bother to go to work? Would you keep putting money in the bank and putting money in the stock markets and your 401k and your IRAs? Would you continue planning for the future all responsible like if there was no future promised, or you were being told like there is no future at all? Global markets would likely crash hard and fast if they announced that. If they were like, yeah, asteroid, gonna hit in 2029 or 2036 or 2050. Global markets would likely crash hard and fast because they are based on future value, and now that future would be gone. You would see a lot of behavior that isn't desirable. Panic runs on food, supplies, human beings feeling hopeless and despondent, no one really following the rules anymore. They're going to kind of just do whatever they want, whether it's stealing, killing, etc. Society would destabilize and everything would fall apart. Now, the government, in order to keep doing all the stuff they're doing, right, with NASA and the military and whatever, they depend on taxes. They depend on markets. They depend on long-term investments. They also depend on things like power grids, food supply chains, healthcare systems. This only works if people show up every day and play their roles. So I was talking to my mother about this the other day, and, she's older, and she doesn't like to think about this stuff, but I make her. And I said, yeah, they wouldn't tell us because the markets would crash. And she's like, yeah, but if the markets crashed, like then they would lose all their money. But what does it matter if it's an apocalypse and the world ends and society has to restart? Like they wouldn't have any money either, or whatever money they have would be meaningless and wouldn't, matter. It doesn't have any value anymore. And I'm like, yes, that's absolutely true. But leading up to that time, the government still wants to, for some reason, focus on things like space exploration and upping our nuclear profile. And to do all of those things, to prepare for whatever is coming, they need money now. And they depend on not only us continuing to invest in the stock market, in stocks, in bonds, in our IRAs, our 401ks. They need us to continue showing up for work. They need everything to keep going as it is so that they can focus on doing whatever they're doing to prevent whatever may be coming or whatever they're doing, right? Let's be honest here, though. Government authority is partly psychological. People follow rules because they expect stability, consequences, a future. But with that future gone, authority becomes so much harder to enforce. So now I want to talk about NASA's DART mission, launched in November of 2021, the world's first planetary defense mission attempting to intentionally change the orbit of a celestial object. So basically DART is like, hey, we're going to figure out if we can, make an asteroid that's going to hit us, not hit us anymore. So DART did an experiment basically just to see if it worked. And to do that experiment, they targeted the binary asteroid system Didymos and its moonlet Dimorphos. Moonlet? That's adorable. I had never heard that word before. It's moonlet Dimorphos. Okay, so NASA said that this binary asteroid system, Didymos and Dimorphos, they were not a threat to Earth, but this would provide the ideal testing grounds to see, could they actually make a difference, make a change if they were kind of trying to attack something the size of an asteroid that would hurt the Earth if it hit. So on September 26, 2022, the DART spacecraft successfully impacted Dimorphos at approximately 4 miles per second. And this shortened Dimorphos's orbit around the asteroid Didymos by 32 to 33 minutes. Which is pretty big, actually. That's it's a good result. So the mission's trip confirmed that NASA can successfully navigate a spacecraft to intentionally collide with an asteroid to change its orbital path. And this marked humanity's first time purposely changing the movement of a near-Earth object and the first demonstration of asteroid deflection technology. Now, obviously, in my opinion only, DART was a thing because it was a response to the discovery of Apophis. Even though they tell us that we shouldn't be concerned about this massive meteor that's named after the Egyptian god of chaos and destruction and is on a direct path to Earth, I think DART was the response to Apophis. DART was created by NASA and Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory, along with NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. Okay, so now I'm looking all over the place. I'm trying to scan the internet for something that helps me put all of this together. And I found the video of a creator on TikTok called Decoded Propaganda. And he has a theory that was interesting. He said that maybe Artemis 2 wasn't a mission to fly around the moon at all. And I will acknowledge once again that a lot of people think the whole mission was fake, that we've never been to the moon, and this newest claim that we went again is just a distraction from something else. So his theory is that maybe the mission wasn't fake, it just didn't have anything to do with the moon. What if Artemis 2 really did launch, but not with astronauts on it? Because DART is an unmanned rocket. By the way, you're not crashing into a heavy space rock to change its orbit with astronauts in there. It's unmanned. So without astronauts in the Artemis 2, it launches and its intended mission was to reach Apophis and crash into it, trying to change its orbit so it doesn't pose a risk to the Earth anymore. Even though publicly they're saying it doesn't pose a risk, but you get what I'm saying. So what if the 2021 DART mission was the test, which they have said it was when they crashed into the little planet and its moonlet? And then what if Artemis 2 was the technology in action for the first time? So here's where I want to pump the brakes for a second because I want to be really clear about something. I am not standing here telling you that an asteroid is on its way to Earth and the government is hiding it from us. I'm not saying that. I couldn't say that. What I'm saying is that if that were the case, if something was coming, if there was a real incredible threat to life on this planet as we know it, we have already established that you and I would be among the last people to know, the absolute last people to know about it. And we would probably never find out directly. We talked about why, the markets, the panic, the complete unraveling of the societal contract that keeps civilization from eating itself. There is not a government on earth who would look at that math and decide full transparency was the right call. So if we wouldn't be told directly, what would it look like? What would the signs be? I think if you knew something catastrophic was coming, something extinction level, something that was going to reset the planet, you would start building an ark, a proverbial Noah's Ark, not a literal boat, but the modern equivalent, a self-sustaining, fortified, remote location where the right people could survive long enough to come out the other side and rebuild. And you would do it quietly, and you would start doing it early, and you would make sure the people on your ark were the ones whose knowledge, skills, and resources would be valuable in whatever world came after. Now, I want you to think about who gets a seat on that ark. It's not random. In the story of Noah, God didn't just grab whoever happened to be standing nearby or whoever was a good person. There was a list. There were people deemed essential to the continuation of life, people and creatures whose genetic material, whose knowledge, whose capabilities were considered worth preserving, right? And so in our modern version of that story, the list would probably look something like this. The people who understand how to rebuild critical infrastructure. The people who understand energy systems, weapons, technology, food, production, medicine, communications. The people who understand, advanced material science, space systems, nuclear technology, satellite networks. Does any of that sound familiar? Because it should. And here's the thing that I can't get out of my head. If something big and bad was coming to the earth, destructive, destroying, life-changing, and I mean this as a thought experiment, stay with me, you wouldn't announce it. You wouldn't put out a press release. What you would do is watch the behavior of the people who would know, because people who know things act differently than people who don't. They make different decisions, different moves, different investments, different preparations. And if you know what to look for, their behavior starts to tell a story that their words never would. So let's look at what the people close to power, close to government, closest to the kind of information that never makes the evening news. Let's look at them and what they've been quietly doing for the last decade or so, because I think it's worth paying attention to. Let's start with Peter Thiel. If you don't know who Peter Thiel is, he's the co-founder of PayPal, an early investor in Facebook, and the founder of Palantir, a data analytics company whose primary customers are the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, and intelligence agencies. So this is not a random rich guy. This is someone who is deeply structurally embedded in the government and military information ecosystem. Now, in 2011, Peter Thiel said publicly, and I'm going to quote him directly here, "I am happy to say categorically that I have found no other country that aligns more with my view of the future than New Zealand." And he called New Zealand a utopia. That same year, he was awarded New Zealand citizenship after spending only 12 days in the country, bypassing the standard residency requirements that normally take years to fulfill. 12 days. They just ungave it to him. Now make of that what you will. Peter Thiel isn't alone in his affection for New Zealand, though. Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, said something in 2017 that I think about a lot. He told The New Yorker that among the ultra-wealthy, buying property in New Zealand had become a code for something, a shorthand. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that saying you're buying a house in New Zealand is kind of a wink, wink, say no more. He actually did say wink, wink, say no more, by the way. But he also claimed that more than 50% of tech billionaires have some form of what he called apocalypse insurance, more than half. Let that land for a second. These are not paranoid outsiders. These are the people running the most powerful companies and technologies on the planet. And the majority of them have a plan for when the world ends. They just haven't told the rest of us what they're planning for. So what exactly is apocalypse insurance? Well, think of it like regular insurance. You buy it not because you're certain something bad is going to happen, but because if it does, you want to be covered. And, you think the chance of something happening is worth it to spend however much money it is for the apocalypse insurance or the regular insurance. Now, the difference is that regular insurance replaces your car or pays your hospital bills. Apocalypse insurance is a self-sustaining fortified compound on a remote island or somewhere out there with its own food supply, water filtration, solar power, medical facilities, armed security, and an escape tunnel. It doesn't replace what you lost. It preserves your entire world while everyone else's world collapses around you, while everyone else on the surface is dying from radiation poison or starving. You are swimming in your Olympic-sized pool in your compound because you're a billionaire. And the people buying it didn't get to where they are by being wrong about these things. So they clearly think there's something worthwhile. And, there's enough of a potential for something to happen so that they will put all of this money and planning into apocalypse insurance. Peter Thiel's own plans for New Zealand were ambitious. He purchased a 477-acre block of land on the shores of Lake Wanaka on the South Island, a location famous, interestingly enough, as a filming location for The Lord of the Rings. So at least the scenery will be nice when civilization ends. Peter Thiel's plans include a bunker-style compound embedded directly into the hillside, a glass-lined guest lodge over 1,000 feet long, capable of housing up to 24 people, and a private owner's accommodation pod surrounded by landscaping and water features. The local council rejected the application in 2022, citing the impact on the surrounding landscape, but Peter Thiel has not withdrawn his application, and there's no indication he plans to walk away from the project. Also worth noting, Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, the man behind ChatGPT, has a standing arrangement with Peter Thiel. If a catastrophic event occurs, Altman's plan is to board his private jet and fly directly to Thiel's New Zealand property. The two most powerful figures in artificial intelligence have a joint apocalypse plan, and it involves getting to the other side of the planet as fast as possible. Now, New Zealand isn't the only destination on the ARC manifest. In fact, there is a term that's been circulating in financial and real estate circles for the last several years that I want to introduce you to because I think it's one of the most revealing pieces of language to come out of the billionaire prepper world. The term is bolt hole. So a bolt hole, in the most literal sense, is an escape tunnel. It is an escape tunnel that animals use when they're trapped, the hidden exit, the last resort passage out when everything else has failed. In the context of the ultra-wealthy billionaire class, a bolt hole is a remote, fortified, self-sustaining property that exists for one purpose: to get in and stay in when the world outside ceases to be survivable. These are not vacation homes, although they look like them. They aren't investment properties. They are escape hatches, and they have been quietly appearing all over the world. Yes, in the wilderness of New Zealand's South Island, but also on remote Hawaiian islands, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, in the Scottish Highlands, in the mountains of California, beneath the streets of Palo Alto. And the people building them are not random. They are among the most powerful, most connected, and most informed human beings alive. So let's talk about where they're building and who is building what, because when you lay it all out side by side, it stops looking like a coincidence very quickly. It's not like, oh, one billionaire got a bunker, an apocalyptic bunker, and now I need to get one too, or I'm not going to be cool anymore. That's not what's happening here. So Mark Zuckerberg, who we all know and love, I hate him, actually. You guys know I hate Mark Zuckerberg. I think he's one of the worst people ever. But Mark Zuckerberg has been acquiring land on the Hawaiian island of Kauai since 2014. His compound, called Koalo Ranch, spans 1,400 acres and includes 2 large mansions connected by underground tunnels that feed into a 5,000 square foot bunker. The bunker has blast-resistant doors, its own food supply, its own water system, and an escape hatch. Workers on the site were required to sign non-disclosure agreements, and some were let go for something as simple as a social media post, because he didn't want us to know he was doing it. And that's how it leaked, right? Because people who were working on it were like, oh, Mark Zuckerberg's building an apocalypse bunker, haha, and they posted it, and then they were fired, right? So a 6-foot wall blocks the entire project from the view of the nearby road. And when asked directly if he was building a doomsday bunker, Zuckerberg said no. He described the underground space as, quote, just like a little shelter. It's like a basement. He said it's like a basement, a 5,000 square foot blast-resistant basement with an escape hatch and its own food and water supply. Sure, Mark. Okay. And if Hawaii wasn't enough, Zuckerberg also purchased 11 properties in the Crescent Park neighborhood of Palo Alto, California, beneath which he added approximately 7,000 square feet of underground space. His neighbors call it a bunker or a billionaire's bat cave. He could never be Batman. He calls it a basement, okay? We're going to go ahead and call it an apocalypse bunker. And Mark Zuckerberg has this in Hawaii and he has this in California. That way, no matter where he's at, if something goes down, he's ready, right? That's why he's got 2. And he's got enough money to have 2 because of us, because of all of us. Ugh. So Larry Ellison, co-founder of Oracle, took the Hawaii strategy to a completely different level. In 2012, he purchased 98% of the entire island of Lanai for $300 million. Not a plot of land, not a compound, 98% of an entire island, including 2 Four Seasons resort hotels, 90,000 acres of land, and a town of 3,200 residents. He has since been building hydroponic greenhouses powered by solar arrays, developing a self-sustaining food infrastructure, and when COVID hit, he made Lanai his permanent home. He called it, and I want you to really hear this, the sustainable Eden in the Pacific. A self-sufficient island in the middle of the ocean owned almost entirely by one man with its own food production, its own power grid, and enough hotel infrastructure to house a very significant number of people comfortably for a long time. Also in Hawaii, Oprah Winfrey purchased a 163-acre estate on Maui back in 2002 and has been adding to her land holdings ever since, now totaling over 650,000 square meters. Billionaire Frank Vandersloot purchased a 2,000-acre ranch just south of Zuckerberg's Kauai compound. Jeff Bezos has properties on Maui as well. So when you zoom out and look at the map of who owns what in Hawaii, it stops looking like a coincidence and starts looking like a coordination. 11% of the private land across the Hawaiian Islands is owned by just 37 billionaires. And then there's Bill Gates, who reportedly has bunkers beneath multiple homes. Not one home, multiple. We don't know exactly how many or where because Bill Gates is not in the habit of announcing his bunker portfolio, and everyone who worked on it is probably dead. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke, Bill. But multiple credible sources have reported this consistently. Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, has admitted to owning a heavily fortified underground structure, though he resists calling it a bunker. Of course he wouldn't. In a podcast appearance, he said he might build another one. And when asked why, he said something I found very interesting. He said, quote, "It's not because of AI, it's because people are dropping bombs again," end quote. Now, I want to mention this because a lot of these tech billionaires are actually building bunkers because they're afraid of what happens when AI transcends and becomes AGI, which we've talked about in the Epstein videos. But if you didn't watch the Epstein videos, AGI means artificial general intelligence, which is AI that's as smart as a human, can learn and think like a human, can process things like a human, just way smarter, faster, and better. A lot of these billionaires are buying these bunkers because they're afraid of what happens when the robots take over. I'm not kidding. Now, I want us all to sit with that for a second because Sam Altman is saying this, okay? He's like, it's not because of AI, it's because people are dropping bombs. When many of his peers are terrified of AI and AGI. And we have to understand that this is the man who is arguably building the most transformative and potentially dangerous technology in human history. And his reason for building a bunker isn't the technology he's personally responsible for unleashing on the world, it's bombs. Okay, Sam Altman, I don't believe you. So let's take stock of what we have here. The co-founder of PayPal and one of the primary architects of the modern surveillance and defense technology ecosystem is building a fortified compound embedded in a hillside in New Zealand. The CEO of Meta, who we know spies on people for the government, he's building a blast-resistant underground bunker on a remote Hawaiian island, a basement, and he won't let his construction workers talk about it. The co-founder of Oracle bought an entire island and is turning it into a self-sustaining ecosystem. The co-founder of LinkedIn is openly acknowledging that more than half of tech billionaires have apocalypse insurance and describing New Zealand property purchases as a wink and nod among the elite. The CEO of OpenAI has a bunker, a backup plan involving Peter Thiel's New Zealand compound, and also, by the way, a supply of potassium iodide, which, just so you know, is what you take to protect your thyroid from radiation exposure in a nuclear event. And Elon Musk is building rockets to get to Mars. Okay, these are not random, disconnected decisions made by eccentric rich people with too much money and too much time. This is a pattern. This is coordinated, expensive, logistically complex preparation being undertaken simultaneously by the most powerful and best-informed private citizens on the planet. And it's probably the only reason Mark Zuckerberg's wife stays with him, because she's like, well, if the apocalypse is coming, at least I'll have a place to go. I'm just kidding. It's just a joke. So people who have direct access to government officials, intelligence figures, classified, contractors, and each other. People who, by the way, have a financial and strategic incentive to know about existential threats before the rest of us do, because being caught off guard is the one thing that none of their money can protect them from. And I keep coming back to this. We talked about Apophis. We talked about the surge in fireball activity in early 2026 that even the American Meteor Society said represented a measurable and unexplained shift in the data. We talked about NASA's DART mission, humanity's first attempt to redirect an asteroid, and the question of whether Artemis 2 was something other than what we're being told, maybe. We talked about Carl Grillmeyer, who was building the instruments designed to find the dark asteroids we can't see yet, shot dead on his front porch with no known motive by somebody that I'm still not sure even exists. We talked about General McCaslin, who sat at the intersection of classified space programs, advanced materials research, and the most sensitive programs in the U.S. government, gone without a trace. Now I'm looking at the most powerful people in the world quietly building their own Noah's Arks. And I'm asking myself the same question I think you're asking right now. I hope you're asking, is this apocalypse insurance for a world that's generally getting more unstable and dangerous? Maybe, probably partly. Or is it something more specific? Is there something on the horizon that a very, very, very small number of people are aware of? Something that has not and will not be announced. And the only way we would ever know about it is by watching what the people who know are doing rather than listening to what they're saying, listening to what they're telling us. Like, look at what they're doing. Don't listen to what they're telling us. I'm not telling you that the asteroid is coming. I'm not telling you that. I'm not saying Apophis is going to hit in 2029 or 2036 or 2050 or whatever. I'm telling you to keep your eye on the billionaires and their arcs. And I also want to talk about something that has been bothering me since I started pulling all of this together. And it's one of those things that once I saw it, I genuinely couldn't stop thinking about it. So bear with me here because we're going to get a little sciencey, but I promise I'll try to keep it concise. And actually, we're probably not going to get as sciencey as we've already gotten. So we've been discussing NASA's plans to go back to the moon. Allegedly, the Artemis program building infrastructure on the lunar surface, establishing a long-term human presence there. And the reason that they have given us for doing all of this is that the moon is a stepping stone, a practice run. The ultimate goal, they say, is Mars. The idea being is that we establish ourselves on the moon, we learn how to live and work in a harsh off-world environment, and then we use that knowledge and infrastructure to eventually get humans to Mars, and one day maybe make it habitable there on Mars, a second home for humanity, a backup planet. And it sounds inspiring, and it sounds like science, and it sounds like progress. And most of us are like, well, that's cool. That's science fiction. It's future. Who cares? I won't be around when that happens. But then I started thinking about it differently, and I have a question that I cannot find a satisfying answer to. Actually, I have several questions, but let's start with this one. Why Mars? Now, before you answer that, let me tell you about something called the Goldilocks zone, which I'm sure you're already familiar with. And this is the region around a star where conditions are just right for liquid water to exist on a planet's surface. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Hence Goldilocks. And Earth sits perfectly in the Goldilocks zone relative to our sun. That's a big part of why life exists here, why we can survive here. Mars sits at the outer edge of that zone, which is partly why NASA points to it as a candidate for human habitation. Technically, it's in the zone, technically. But here's the thing about the Goldilocks zone that nobody really talks about. It only refers to temperature and the potential for liquid water. That's it. It says nothing, absolutely nothing about whether a planet can actually protect the life living on it. It's just like, hey, can people potentially live here? Right? And protection, as it turns out, is kind of important because here on Earth, we have something we take so completely for granted that most of us never even think about it. We have an atmosphere, a thick, dense, beautiful atmosphere that has been quietly doing one of the most important jobs in the history of life on this planet. It has been destroying incoming space rocks before they can hit us. Our planet has been absorbing a constant, relentless barrage of space debris for billions of years, and most of the time we don't even notice because our atmosphere handles it quietly and efficiently, like a bouncer at a very exclusive club, outside of Q1 of 2026, of course, where too many have slipped by the bouncer unnoticed until they do something flashy. Now let's talk about Mars, our backup planet. Mars has an atmosphere that is approximately 1% as dense as Earth. 1%. It is essentially a near vacuum compared to what surrounds us here. And what that means practically is that Mars has almost no ability to burn up incoming space debris before it hits the surface. Small objects that would be completely incinerated in our atmosphere hit the Martian surface at full force. And you can see the evidence of this everywhere you look on Mars. The entire surface is covered in impact craters, thousands upon thousands of them of every size, representing billions of years of unimpeded bombardment by space debris that had nothing standing between it and the ground. Earth has craters too, right? We know that, but far fewer visible ones because our atmosphere destroys most incoming objects before they arrive, and our weather and water systems erode the evidence of older impacts over time. Mars has none of those protective systems. What hits Mars, all of it. And if that wasn't enough, Mars also has no global magnetic field. Earth's magnetic field is another critical layer of our protection system. It deflects solar radiation and cosmic rays that would otherwise bombard the surface. Without it, the surface of Mars is exposed to radiation levels that are genuinely dangerous to human health over time. So you're not just talking about a planet that gets pelted by space rocks, like on the weekly. You're talking about a planet that simultaneously just eradicates everything living on its surface. Mars is not passively inhospitable. Mars is actively hostile to human biology in multiple ways at the same time. And so when NASA and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos talk about Mars as humanity's long-term survival plan, our insurance policy, our backup home, the place we go if something happens to Earth, I need someone to explain something to me. Because even a pretty significantly damaged Earth, an Earth that has experienced a major asteroid impact, an Earth going through what scientists call an impact winter, would still have a thicker atmosphere than Mars. It would still have more protection from incoming space debris. It would still have surviving ecosystems. It would still have liquid water somewhere. It would still have air that humans can breathe. In almost any catastrophic scenario you can imagine, short of total planetary destruction, Earth would still be more survivable than Mars for human life. So why Mars? Why are we pouring billions and billions of dollars and some of the most brilliant scientific minds on the planet into building a human presence on a crater-covered, radiation-soaked, atmospherically barren rock that is less hospitable to human life than the most inhospitable places on Earth? Why wouldn't we put that money into creating apocalypse bunkers on Earth that can hold the people who live here now? Unless, and I want you to really sit with this, unless the plan isn't actually to live on Mars, not permanently, not long-term. What if the plan is simply to be somewhere else for a while, far away enough from Earth that you survive whatever's coming and close enough that you can come back when it's over? Not a new civilization, a waiting room. An extraordinarily expensive, extraordinarily well-resourced waiting room for the people who know enough to build one and have enough money to get there. Because suddenly, when you look at it through that lens, the whole picture shifts. The urgency of the Artemis program, the moon as a stepping stone, the nuclear reactors that Los Alamos National Lab all of a sudden has to build 80 of a year. Elon Musk's relentless, almost feverish drive to get humans to Mars on a timeline that a lot of serious scientists think is wildly unrealistic for permanent colonization, but might make a lot more sense as an emergency evacuation timeline, right? They can build structures underneath Mars, keep everyone away from the radiation and have oxygen and stuff just for a few years, maybe, while shit settles down on Earth. And if you're underground and you won't get hit by the meteors and the asteroids, maybe that makes more sense. We'll just fly all the people there who can afford a ticket and they can wait it out, in luxury. And then the billionaires on Earth who have their own bunkers, they can wait it out in luxury while the rest of us die. Now, Jeff Bezos building Blue Origin and talking about millions of people living and working in space. I mean, the fact that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, the two men most obsessed with getting humanity off this planet, are also two of the most connected private citizens in the world when it comes to government, military, and intelligence relationships. And then you bring it back down to Earth literally, and you look at all the bolt holes, the bunkers, the arcs being quietly built and assembled in New Zealand and Hawaii and the Scottish Highlands and beneath the streets of Palo Alto. And you realize that whatever these people are preparing for, they are preparing on multiple levels at the same time. Some of them are going underground. Some of them are going to remote islands. And some of them apparently are planning to leave the planet entirely. I'm not telling you that an asteroid is coming. I'm just telling you to watch the arcs, all of them, the ones in the ground, the ones on the water, the ones pointed at the sky. It's very interesting when you start putting it all together. Okay, so now that I've scared everyone thoroughly and thrown everyone into a loop of existential dread and given you quite a bit to think about, this video, I'm sure, has gone on long enough based on the amount of time I've been filming it. And we have so much more to talk about. In fact, this script is longer and I could keep going, but I know my editor will kill me because these 2-hour videos take him forever to edit, and they're very dense, and there's a lot of assets to add, and it takes a long time. So we're going to save that for next time. But please, I can't wait to hear what you think about this. I can't wait to hear what you think about what we've talked about today, because it's basically all I can think about lately. And yeah, like many people have said in the comments, Stephanie, make sure you let everyone know that you're in a stable mental health status and you're not thinking about taking your own life and you're happy and all that. Of course I am. I would never take my own life, and I am completely mentally stable, even though we live in a world where stuff like this exists, and it's hard to kind of, keep your wits about you. But I will say, listen, we don't know what's going to happen. I could be totally wrong, or I could be totally right. And either way, we don't have control over it. I always like to tell myself, what is not in my control is not in my mind, right? Unless I'm thinking about it and talking with you guys about it, but I'm not going to go out into the world and just think like, oh my God, what's going to happen? I don't have a doomsday bunker. I don't have control over it. But you never know what could happen. You never know what could happen. Maybe we should all build our own doomsday bunker, like a Harlowe family doomsday bunker. We'll just pull everything together. We have options, and we're together in this. So let's just leave it at that for now. Like this video if you liked it. Share it if you think it's worth sharing. Please let me know in the comment section what you think. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, stay kind, stay beautiful, and stay safe. And I'll see you very, very soon. Bye.
Straight down.